This is Dave Stanton for Carbatec. Locate all of the items to build the stand. Fit the adjustable feet to the legs of the stand, including the M10 hex nut to lock the feet in position. Fasten the stand tie bars and router table top support rails using the M6 by 12 hex cap bolts and the M6 flat washers through the rails into the threaded holes of the legs. When you are sure the stand is square, tighten all of the bolts. Place the router table top upside down on a soft surface as you continue the build. Attach the completed stand to the router table top with the feet facing up at the moment, using the M6 by 16 hex socket cap screws, spring washers and M6 flat washers. Check the top support rails of the stand that come into contact with the router table top are straight. If there is a slight deflection, you may need to shim to maintain a flat surface on the router table's top. This can be done at any time during or after the assembly. Fit the M6 by 40 flathead support screws for the insert plate with the M6 hex nuts fitted into the tapped holes around the central opening in the router table top, so they just protrude into the rebate for the router plate. Do not tighten the lock nuts at this stage. You can also fit the side bracket bases to the bottom of the tabletop at this stage. There are pre-drilled and tapped holes waiting for the M6 by 16 hex socket cap screws, spring washers and M6 flat washers. Ensure the fence supports are a tight fit against the side and underneath of the router table, but not protruding past the back of the router table. If you are using the optional dust box, now is a good time to fit it to the underside of the table whilst the table is upside down. Use the M6 by 12 hex cap bolts, spring washers and M6 flat washers. We will look at the dust box assembly later in the video. With assistance from someone who is able-bodied, stand the table up in the correct manner so that now the router table top will be showing the mitre slot and T-track section facing towards you. Place the router mount plate into the work table rebate designed to accommodate the router mount plate. Adjust the support screws from underneath the router table so that they are not pushing the router mount plate proud of the top of the router table. Tighten the lock nuts up on those support screws with a 10mm spanner. Using the supplied M3 Allen key, adjust the grub screws in the router plate so that the router plate is level with the surface of the router table. Fit the two M6 by 30 flathead cap screws that hold the router plate in position with the supplied M4 Allen key, but do not over-tighten. You may need to adjust the support screws in conjunction with these two hold-down screws. Using a straight edge, adjust the side brackets so that they are flush with the top of the surface of the router table. Tighten the screws when you are confident the side brackets are straight and true. You can now fit the router lock handles through the base of the fence into the 5/16 inch lock nuts that you have slid into the side brackets. If you're using the optional fence micro adjusters, you don't need to use the 5/16 inch lock nuts, as the fence micro adjuster set has its own micro adjustable blocks and guide blocks that the lock handles screw into. You will notice that the scales on the side of the fence can be adjusted by undoing the clamping knob on the underside of the side bracket. This allows you to make accurate adjustments to position the fence. Fit the router table fence faces to the router table fence using the T-bolts and M8 lock knobs, not forgetting to also use the M8 flat washers. Fit the dust port to the rear of the fence and also the safety guard to the front T-track of the router table fence. Fit the NVR switch box in a position that is comfortable for you to access it. This will either be to the left or the right front leg of the router table stand and facing towards the front or off to the side of the router table stand. Place in a comfortable position that is easy to reach with either your hand or your knee, but do not cover the threaded hole in the leg that is designed for the router bit storage rail. Fit the support that holds the mitre gauge and the optional crank for the height adjustable router plate to the opposite side of the front of the router table to the position that you put the switch. Assemble the optional dust box using a Phillips head screwdriver to tighten the M6 dome head screws. The optional storage drawer fits to the underside of the dust box and is a simple matter of using the same style of screw. A tip here is to put some oil on the underside of the dust collection box. This will make the motion of the drawer opening and closing simple if it is lubricated in this area. It is also an idea to put a small amount of oil on the drawer runners. Don't forget to fit the 2 Allen head screws that are the drawer stops. The miter gauge is assembled by using the M6x30 hex cap bolts slid into the T-track when the miter gauge fence is in the upright position. Secure the bolt with the supplied M6 flat washers and M6 wing nuts. This allows you to adjust the position of the fence depending on the size and the angle that you wish to pass your workpiece in front of the router cutter. Carbatec supply a starter pin for bringing your workpiece up to the cutter if you are not using the fence. This reduces the risk of your workpiece being pulled around behind the cutter. Note, these router tables are not designed for smaller trim-style routers. On the router mount plate, I've put some masking tape that is on the top and it wraps all the way around to the back. And on that I've written F for front, R for right, and I've put that on the back as well, so I don't get confused as I'm working on this particular section. One of the first things to do is to check that your router will fit neatly under the table, and you need to work out where the position is that you want it, where you want your switch and your variable speed control if your router has one. I'd like to have it facing towards the front because I've got the dust box fitted here and it's going to make it a lot easier to access those items. The other thing to look for is where the handles are going to be if you're using the dust box, and making sure that if you need to set it up slightly diagonally, that they'll be fine as well. On my router, the variable speed control is here and my switch is here. I put a little piece of tape on the bottom of the base plate for the router. This is the correct way that it fits on. It's not going on upside down. This is the correct way. So I've identified where my switch is on there. Now I can take this away and totally using this. This is my template now. In conjunction with the transparent template that Carbatec supply, first thing I do is I line up the crosshairs dead center at the middle of the insert plate there. Then I can put my base plate on and I can position that knowing where the switch is, and that also indicates where the handles are going to be because it's very close to the handles. I can pop that on top and I can look at the concentric circles and line it up perfectly. Once I've done that, I can take out the plate, the router mount plate, and put some clamps on to hold everything tight. Now I'm going to use my base plate to tell me where I need to drill the holes through the router mount plate. Once I've drilled the holes, I will need to countersink the holes as well. I will probably need to get longer screws to mount the router to the underside of this base plate. The reason being, my base plate for my router is much thinner than the router mount plate for the table. To mount your router to the underside of the lift, it's a very easy situation. You release the Allen screws underneath, half a turn using the supplied Allen key. And then you notice here there's these little locks, these slide plates that come across and catch this base plate. Pull them back and then you can lift it clear and you have a multitude of holes that will line up with the holes on your router. Once you've got the router on, you return it and then you can rotate this to any position. This is very easy. You really don't have to worry too much about where your switch and your handles and all that kind of stuff is, because you can position this anywhere you want. That's got it solid. Beautiful. There's going to be a little slot left there for these guys to slide in and catch. When you're fitting the router to the lift, keep an eye on the screws that actually do the raising, because these handles are going to have to travel down past. If you have the router mounted totally diagonally, which you would think would be a pretty good idea, when you're raising the router in the lift, this will collide with that and you won't be able to raise it. So you have to push it ever so slightly off. And on my particular router, I've got to be aware of the turret on the other side doesn't catch with the drive chain. So a couple of tips there. When you've got it all in position, push those supports in with a screwdriver. All I'm doing is I'm putting a flat blade screwdriver down in behind the support and turning it. So put that in there. Underneath the lift, I can put the Allen key onto that screw and rotate. Again with this one, down in there, lock it in position, rotate. If you don't push these mounts incorrectly, you do have the risk of the router dropping off inside the cabinet. They must go in and lock on to the bottom plate. One of the other tips is you can identify where the front is of the lift by this. This is on the front. This is my lock. This is my height adjust for the router itself, and my switch and my speed control. They're all going to be facing the front. Turn it over and slide the whole thing down like so. And across. Done. All right, now I need to see if it's going to come all the way up. We check all the function before I screw it back down. That's raising it up nicely. Lower it down again. And I can put these screws back in. There is a bit of grease on the mechanism, something to be aware of. You don't really want to have that all over the plate. So you need to clean everything when you've finished. That's held down. That one's also held down. Beautiful. Now the router is in the lift, I can plug the router into the back of the switch box. There's a power connection there for it. Then I can plug the switch box itself to the power supply. Next thing to do is to turn the router on its own switch, and it will still be controlled by the NVR switch at the front here. So I turned it on and off from there. If using the optional Carbatec dust box, you will need to pass the router's plug through the side of the box first by undoing the screws to the power cord clamp on the side of the dust box. Pass the cable through and then reattach the power cord clamp. Attach a 63mm hose to the port on the back of the router table's fence. If using the optional dust box, it will come with its own 63mm hose and 2 clamps to be able to secure it to the fence and also the dust port on the back of the box. The fence faces are able to be opened and closed to accommodate the particular router cutter that you are using at the time. This will optimize the draft from your dust extraction and also maximize the support for the workpiece being passed over the router table. Now your router table is ready to go. Enjoy it.